They say you can feel the end of something before it arrives. Like a cold front moving in from the coast. No rain yet, but the air has changed. You can taste it. Amara felt it the moment she sat down at that table. Dinner was her idea. She had actually cooked, which she rarely had time for anymore between hospital rotations and the relentless pace of their life in this gleaming apartment above a city that never asked you how you were doing. She had lit candles, poured wine she wouldn't drink because she had been quietly suspicious of something for 11 days and hadn't yet confirmed it, but her body was already making small private choices without her permission. Ji-hoon sat down at the table the way a man sits down when he has already decided something. Not pulling the chair out with the careless ease of home. Carefully. The way you sit when you've rehearsed the next hour. She noticed. She always noticed. In 3 years of marriage, she had become a scholar of his silences, his jaw, the precise angle of his eyes when he was present versus when he had already left the room inside his own head. He was not present at this table. He was somewhere far ahead of this dinner, standing in a future he had already built without her. They ate quietly, or tried to. The food was beautiful and neither of them could tell you what it tasted like. And then he put down his fork. That was the tell. Ji-hoon never put down his fork before finishing. He cleared his plate with the methodical thoroughness of someone raised to waste nothing. But he put his fork down, lined it up parallel to the plate, the way he lined things up when his hands needed something to do with what his mind was carrying. He said her name. She looked up from her wine glass, the wine glass she hadn't touched. He said, I think we need to talk about the future. Our future. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I think we should seriously consider a divorce. She heard the words with extraordinary, surgical clarity. The way you hear something when your entire nervous system decides this is a moment that must be recorded in full. She did not cry. She did not speak. She set her own fork down, not with his geometric precision, just set it down, and looked at him across the candlelight. He couldn't hold her gaze. He stood, pressed his hand to the marble table, looked at the table, looked at the city beyond the window, looked at anywhere that was not her face. And she sat, perfectly still, her long ponytail over one shoulder, her hands in her lap, her mind running at the speed of a woman who knew something he did not, a secret 11 days old that was quietly changing the arithmetic of every single thing he had just said. He spoke further. Justifications. The kind that are not cruel, but are specific, which is sometimes worse than cruelty. She listened. She is very good at listening. She always has been. It's what made her extraordinary at her work, at her friendships. At this marriage, she was currently watching him dismantle with the careful hands of a man who thought he was being kind. When he finished, she stood, not dramatically, with the quiet, undeniable dignity that is simply who Amara is at her core, in every room, in every season of her life. She pressed her hand to her stomach. She didn't decide to do this. Her hand simply went there, some deep animal part of her gravitating toward the thing she was protecting, and she looked at him. He noticed the gesture. Something crossed his face, a flash, quick as lightning and just as uncontrollable, before the composed mask settled back into place. She walked toward the hallway. Her ponytail swayed between her shoulder blades. He watched her go, and he stayed by the window, where the city burned beautifully below them, indifferent as cities always are. She sat alone on the edge of their enormous, white bed that night. The city lights made moving patterns on the ceiling. Her hand rested on her flat stomach. In the white pharmacy bag on the duvet beside her was a small box she had not yet opened. She had been afraid to open it before dinner. She was more afraid now. Across the apartment, Ji-hoon sat in the dark living room with a glass of whiskey that went warm in his hand. He stared at nothing. He had said the thing he came home to say. It was said. So why did he feel like a man who had done something he could not yet determine was brave or terrible? They were separated by a single wall and a silence that was, at this point, the loudest thing in the building. This was the night of the beginning. Neither of them knew that yet. Morning comes for everyone. The city doesn't care what you said at dinner. The light just comes. Amara woke before Ji-hoon. She always did. 3 years of early hospital rotations had made her body a thing that refused to sleep past 5:30 regardless of what her mind needed. She lay still for a moment, his breathing on the other side of the enormous bed, steady and unrevealing. And then she got up, quietly, the way she had learned to move in this apartment, as though she were a guest who didn't want to impose. She padded to the kitchen in her sleep shirt, her long ponytail loose and slightly wild from sleep. The pharmacy bag sat on the counter where she had left it the night before, after she had taken it out of her bag and set it down, and then not been able to open it. She picked it up now. The box was small and white and entirely unremarkable. The kind of thing you could buy between picking up shampoo and toothpaste, the packaging deliberately neutral, so that every woman who bought it, terrified or hopeful or both at once, could project whatever she needed onto it. She stood at the bathroom mirror for a long time before she did anything. The morning light from the frosted window was soft and cool and honest. It showed her everything. The slight tension around her eyes, the way sleep had softened her usually composed expression. She looked at herself the way you look at someone you're about to tell something enormous. She looked like a woman who was about to find out whether her life was about to become exponentially more complicated than it had been 12 hours ago, when a divorce had seemed like the most complicated thing on the horizon. She opened the box. She took the test. She waited. In the silence of that white marble bathroom, with the city beginning to hum alive outside, with her husband sleeping in the room beyond the closed door, she waited. And then there were 2 lines. 2 lines so immediate and definitive that there was no ambiguity, no squinting, no does that count. Just 2 clear lines, parallel and absolute, changing the fundamental facts of her life in a bathroom at 5:40 in the morning. She slid down the wall. She sat on the cool marble floor with her knees pulled to her chest and the test in her hand, and she felt every emotion available to the human body arrive simultaneously, like a crowd trying to get through a single door. Joy, real, unexpected, shooting star joy that she hadn't anticipated feeling, hadn't given herself permission to feel. Terror, enormous and immediate. Grief for the version of this moment she had always imagined, the moment she would tell him, and he would be happy, and they would be one of those couples. The devastation of the timing. The beautiful, impossible, catastrophic timing. The test in her hand was the most significant object she had ever held. She let herself have the floor for exactly as long as she needed. Then she stood up. She splashed cold water on her face. She looked at her reflection again. And she watched herself make a decision. Watched it happen in her own eyes. Watched the resolve move in like weather, settling into something that held. She would handle this. She always handled things. That had always been both her greatest strength and her most private loneliness, the capacity to handle things, which meant she was never quite allowed to be the one who couldn't. When she emerged from the bathroom, the test curled in her palm, fingers closed, she found him in the kitchen.
Yehon.
Still in last night's clothes, or perhaps already dressed for work. His suit jacket was on, tie not yet knotted, hair perfect. Pouring coffee with the casual sovereignty of a man in his own kitchen. His back was to her. He hadn't heard her come down the hall. She stopped. And for a private, stolen moment, she simply looked at him. This man. This extraordinarily handsome man she had married. His broad shoulders, the precise angle of his jaw visible even in profile. The way he moved through a kitchen like he moved through everything, with quiet, unearned confidence. This man who, 10 hours ago, had asked her for a divorce. She looked at him and she felt love and rage and tenderness and grief all layered on top of one another like transparencies on a projector, each one true, none of them complete. He turned. He saw her. They stood at either end of the kitchen and looked at each other with a specific, loaded politeness of 2 people who have said enormous things and now must navigate the morning. He said something short, something that gestured toward civility. She nodded. He turned back to his coffee. She turned toward the bedroom. Later, dressed and composed, her long curly ponytail gathered and perfect, her outfit armor, she sat on the bed with her phone in both hands. She had pulled up a name, Dr. Etienne Laurent. Her colleague Dr. Park had referred her, weeks ago, casually. Excellent doctor, best prenatal specialist in the city, French trained, very thorough. She had saved the number then without urgency, some part of her already knowing, or hoping to know. She called. The appointment was made. She stood at the front door, coat on, bag over her shoulder, and she paused. She looked back. Ji-hoon sat at the table with his coffee, in his suit, handsome and separate, not watching her leave. She turned back to the door. She pressed it open. She stepped out. The city was already loud and indifferent, and moving in every direction. She walked into it with a straight back and a secret she didn't yet fully understand, toward a doctor she had never met, toward the beginning of the part of the story that would change everything. The clinic was not what she expected, though she couldn't have told you what she expected. She had imagined something more purely clinical, fluorescent lights, that particular institutional smell, plastic chairs lined up in rows. Instead, she found pale stone and natural light and fresh white flowers at the reception desk, and the quiet sense of a place that understood that women who came here were often carrying more than one kind of weight. She gave her name. She sat. She waited. She was composure itself, sitting in that cream-colored chair with her coat folded in her lap, her long ponytail over one shoulder, her hands clasped. Anyone looking at her would have seen a beautiful young woman, utterly contained. No one would have seen the test from yesterday morning, the overheard divorce, the night on the bathroom floor. The door opened, and Dr. Etienne Laurent walked into the room. She registered him the way you register something that is briefly, objectively startling before professionalism smooths the reaction over. He was tall, taller than she'd imagined, though she hadn't imagined anything. Fair complexion, the warm, cream fair of someone with northern French ancestry who spent just enough time in the sun. Features that belonged in another century, angular jaw, straight nose, the kind of bone structure that painters had opinions about. Pale blue-gray eyes beneath light brown hair swept neatly back. He was perhaps 32, 33, and wore his white coat with the ease of someone who had stopped noticing they were wearing it. He looked up from his tablet. He saw her. The micro-expression, the briefest involuntary moment of a man registering extraordinary beauty, was mastered in under a second and replaced with the composed, warm, entirely professional expression of Dr. Laurent at work. He introduced himself. His voice was accented, French beneath flawless English, deep and measured, the voice of someone who chose words precisely. He shook her hand. His hand, pale and elegant, a pianist's hands if pianists also had the grip of someone who trusted themselves, held hers briefly. She noted his eyes were exactly the color she might have described as gray-blue if she had been forced to describe them, which she was not. They were not in the business of noting one another's eyes. They were in the business of her health and the small, extraordinary, terrifyingly timed fact that she was pregnant. He was thorough. He was warm in the specific, calibrated way of an excellent doctor. Warm that comforted without blurring the professional line. Warm that said, I am a person and you are a person and that matters, but I am also a doctor and that matters more right now. He asked her history. He reviewed the home test. He ordered a clinical confirmation test and they waited together, well, separately in the appropriate sense, for the results to come back. And then he was reading the full results on his tablet. She watched his pale eyes move across the screen. He was not a man who let his face run ahead of his words. Whatever he was reading, he processed it, and only when he had processed it fully did his expression shift. Just slightly. Just enough. He set the tablet down with the deliberateness of a man preparing to be fully present. He looked at her. She knew the shift in his energy before he spoke, the particular atmospheric change of a doctor who is about to say something that requires all of both of you. He confirmed the pregnancy. She had expected that. She had carried the 2 lines since yesterday morning, let the weight of them settle into her body, prepared herself. And then he continued. He spoke with extraordinary care. Leaning forward slightly, forearms on the desk, one hand open on the surface, not reaching toward her, not overstepping, but open, the way hands are when the person attached to them wants to convey sincerity through their posture, because words sometimes aren't enough. He spoke about what else he had found in her results. A condition. Something to be watched carefully. Something that made this pregnancy not just a pregnancy, but a pregnancy with a designation the medical world called high risk, which is a phrase that sounds clinical but detonates inside the body of the woman it is delivered to like something very different from clinical. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes, extraordinary, luminous, enormous, filled. Not overflowing yet, just filled. The way a glass fills to the absolute rim and holds the surface tension, the only thing between contained and spilled. She looked at him over her hands. He was still there. He had not moved back, had not reached reflexively for the box of tissues or the professional distance that less exceptional doctors retreated to when things became real. He leaned in, slightly. He was with her in this. After a moment, he slid the tissue box within her reach, quietly, without announcement, and leaned back just slightly, giving her the room of his attentive, averted not-quite eyes, letting her feel this without an audience, while not leaving her alone in the room with it. She lowered her hands. She breathed. She looked at the document he had turned to face her, the anatomical diagram, the medical language she was intelligent enough to read and devastating enough to feel simultaneously. They were two people at a desk where a life had just changed direction. And whatever came next, the apartment, Ji-hoon, the divorce conversation, the impossible arithmetic of this timing, it would all have to be navigated from this new geography. She was pregnant. She was high risk. She was 24 years old. She was also the most composed woman Etienne Laurent had examined in 7 years of practice, and something about that, too, stayed with him after she left. She stood on the clinic steps for a long time. The city moved below her. Taxis, pedestrians, a delivery cyclist who narrowly missed a dog on a leash, the ordinary beautiful chaos of urban life that continues without pause regardless of what has just happened to you inside a building. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum. She didn't move. There is a particular species of aloneness that arrives when you have just received news that reorders everything, and you have no one standing beside you who has the right to hear it yet. She was inside that aloneness now. It was not unfamiliar territory. She had navigated enormous things alone before. She had learned, growing up, that being the one who handled things meant learning to hold weight in your own hands before anyone else could see you carrying it. She found a bench in the small park beside the clinic, and she sat. She watched a woman push a stroller. She watched two men argue over a parking space with a performative outrage of people who have very few real problems. She watched pigeons make entirely confident decisions about where to be. The world looked precisely as it always had, which was somehow the strangest part. She took out her phone. She pulled up his contact. Yehon. His name sat in the middle of the screen, his name in Korean with the romanization beside it that she had typed in herself 3 years ago when she saved his number, the first night they met, when she had told herself she was safe because she hadn't yet decided what form this conversation should take, and Amara did not go into significant conversations underprepared. She had learned that truth mattered not just in what you said but when you said it, and how, and whether you had gathered yourself enough to say it cleanly instead of in pieces. She called Myri instead, her best friend. The call connected on the second ring because Myri always answered on the second ring. Amara heard her voice, warm, immediate, reading the frequency and hello, and the tears that had been holding so perfectly at the rim came, finally, quietly and without drama, tracking down her face in the thin afternoon air while she sat on a bench and told her best friend the outline of the last 24 hours. Myri did not say, "Oh my God," or "What a monster," or "You'll be fine." She said, "I'm here," and then she was quiet in the way of someone who understood that being here was the entire job right now. After the call, she found a cafe, ordered herbal tea, sat at the window table, and unfolded the clinic document slowly, like something that might need to be approached with care. She read it again. All of it. The confirmation of pregnancy. The specific medical language of the risk factor, the condition that made this more complicated, that would require monitoring, care, decisions. The kind of information that in a different life, a life where she had not sat at a dinner table last night while her husband asked for a divorce, she would have brought home, and they would have read together and been frightened together, and held each other in a fear that was also a kind of intimacy. Instead, she folded it back into the envelope with careful hands and set it down and wrapped both palms around her tea and made a decision that was also a posture. Spine straight, chin up, forward. Across the city, in the glass tower where Ji-hoon ran international accounts with a methodical precision that had made him impressive at 23 and slightly terrifying at 25, he sat at his desk and stared at his phone. At their last text thread, her last message to him was from 3 days ago, something logistical about whether he wanted dinner. He had responded, "Whatever you want." He had not texted since the dinner. He had not known what to say. He was very good at knowing what to say. It was one of the things about him. He was precise with language, economical and accurate, never wasted words. But he had no words for the morning after you asked your wife for a divorce, and she received it with a stillness that was more unsettling than any reaction you had prepared yourself for. She came back to the apartment in the early evening. The lobby elevator doors opened, and she saw herself reflected in the polished steel, coat, bag, long ponytail, face composed in the way she had assembled it on the bench outside the clinic. Her hand, in the reflection, was pressed to her stomach. She hadn't decided to put it there. The elevator rose. The door to their apartment opened before she reached it. Ji-hoon had heard her key, or perhaps he had been listening for it, and he stood in the doorway. His suit jacket was off. His sleeves were rolled. He was handsome in the specific way that was slightly infuriating when everything was fine and devastating when everything was not. They looked at each other across the threshold. She had something in her chest that was enormous and complex and not yet ready to be spoken. He had something in his face that was the beginning of uncertainty about the thing he had said last night. She could see it. She always saw things in him before he did. Neither of them spoke first. The silence lasted exactly long enough to be the most honest thing either of them had said all day. They sat in the living room like two people who had agreed to talk, and were now discovering that agreement and readiness are not the same thing. She took the armchair. He took the sofa. The distance between them was the furniture length of a well-appointed apartment and approximately 3 years of a marriage that had drifted so slowly neither of them could point to the exact moment it had stopped being easy. He spoke first. That surprised her a little. She had expected the silence to stretch until she broke it, the way she often broke silences, the way she often absorbed the atmospheric weight of rooms and responded to it because someone had to. But he spoke first, which meant he had prepared what he was going to say, which meant he had spent the day at his desk thinking about her instead of his accounts. She noted this, without showing that she noted it. He said the things he had said last night, again but differently. Last night they had been delivered with the finality of a verdict. Tonight they sounded more like an explanation. A person trying to make someone understand a conclusion they had reached, rather than simply announcing it. There was a difference. She heard the difference. He was telling her why he had arrived at this conclusion. The distance he had felt. The separate tracks their lives had settled into. The sense, and he said this carefully, as if testing each word for structural integrity before placing it down, the sense that they had become two people who shared a space without sharing a life. She listened. She was extraordinary at listening. She let every word land and she assessed it without reacting, the way she assessed clinical information, openly, without prejudice, without the defensive shielding that distorts data. And she thought, he is not wrong about some of this. That was the thing she had never told anyone, not even Myri. That the marriage had become a performance of a marriage somewhere in the last year. That they had been excellent at the aesthetic of partnership, the apartment, the dinners, the mutual careers they discussed over coffee, without being fully present to one another in the way she had imagined marriage would feel. She had adapted. She was good at adapting. But adapting is not the same as thriving, and she had known in the private hours that they had been adapting rather than thriving for quite some time. She was listening to the man she loved explain why he wanted to leave her. And in her hand, not literally, but in the hand of her mind, was a small white test with 2 lines that made the geometry of his explanation suddenly, catastrophically more complicated. When he finished, he waited. He was looking at her with the careful attention of someone who expected either tears or argument and had prepared for both. She stood up. She walked to the kitchen. She filled a glass with water and drank from it with her back to him, and she felt him watching her, and she let him watch because she needed 15 seconds of not being observed to feel what she was feeling without having to perform it. She turned back to face him from the kitchen threshold. And something happened to her face, something she hadn't planned. A brief, involuntary erosion of the surface composure. Not tears, not quite tears, but the thing beneath tears that is sometimes more devastating than crying, because it is the truth before the performance of truth.
He saw it.
She watched him see it. He stood. He took a step toward her. She took one step back. Not from fear. She needed him to hear her clearly, and she could only speak clearly from a place of self-possession and proximity to him. This man, this face, made self-possession more effortful than she would admit. She told him she had something to tell him. Not tonight. Tomorrow. She needed him to wait. His face shifted. The architecture of it rearranged slightly. He had come home prepared for a continuation of a conversation, and instead, he was standing in his kitchen being asked to wait for something he didn't know the shape of. He agreed. He always did in the end. Whatever his faults, and she knew them, she had catalogued them with the meticulous attention of someone who loved him. He was not cruel, and he was not dismissive, and when she asked him for something directly, he gave it. She went to bed. He did not. He stood outside the bedroom door. She could hear the absence of his footsteps, the particular quality of someone standing still on the other side of a door for a long time before she heard him move away. In his office across the city, a light was on. Dr. Laurent was still at his desk, long past clinic hours, the file in his hands. He told himself he stayed late often. He told himself this patient's situation was simply medically complex. He set the file down, picked it up again. He was not in the habit of thinking about his patients after hours, and he was aware that this was not entirely about the medicine. He set the file down a final time, turned off his lamp. The clinic went dark. She called the clinic in the morning. She needed to go back. There were questions she hadn't asked, questions she had been too stunned to ask in the first appointment, questions that had surfaced in the dark hours of the night while she'd listened to Ji-hoon's silence on the other side of the bedroom wall. Medical questions, practical questions. The kind that needed answers before she could carry the rest of this forward. She also knew, and did not examine too closely, that she wanted to go back. Dr. Laurent was already at his desk when she arrived. She could tell by the absence of any transitional moment, no jacket being pulled on, no papers being gathered. He was already fully present in his office, entirely at work. He looked up when she came in. A brief, real pause. "You came back," his expression said, though his words were professional and measured as always. She sat across from him, and she told him. Not everything. There were things between a woman and her marriage that were not clinical data and did not need to be submitted as evidence. But the relevant shape of it. She told him that her husband had asked for a divorce. She told him that the pregnancy had not been known to either of them when that conversation happened. She told him that she was, right now, the only person in her life who knew both of these facts simultaneously, which made her something she had no word for. Not quite alone, because a life was beginning inside her, and not quite accompanied, because the person whose child it was did not yet know. She watched him listen. He was extraordinarily good at listening in a specific way that was different from politeness. He didn't just wait for her to stop talking so he could respond. He absorbed what she was saying as she said it, his pale eyes holding hers with steady, complete attention. When she finished, he said something. She looked at him. He stood and went to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked out at the street. He spoke without turning, and she understood this was his version of what she had done in the kitchen, the slight turn away that gives you the breath to say something true without the vulnerability of being watched saying it. He spoke about what she was facing medically. He spoke about the importance of consistent care, of monitoring, of the specific protocols that a high-risk pregnancy required. He spoke about stress, about the documented medical reality that emotional stress in a pregnant woman with her specific condition was not just hard but measurably medically relevant. He spoke about all of this with the precision of someone who was saying very clinical things that contained between the lines something that was not quite clinical. He was telling her, take care of yourself, this is serious, you matter, what is happening to you matters. She watched his back at the window, his white coat, the set of his shoulders. He turned. Their eyes met across the office. Neither of them moved for a moment. It was a moment of the kind that is entirely appropriate and still somehow loud in a room. He returned to his desk. He was Dr. Laurent again, impeccably, usefully professional. He opened her file. He walked her through the next steps with clarity. The monitoring schedule, the specialist referrals, the things to watch for and the things not to fear yet, the parameters of what this situation was, and was not. She took notes on her phone. She asked questions, good questions, specific questions, the questions of an intelligent woman who had decided to understand her situation fully rather than be carried by it. He answered each one completely. They were excellent at this, the two of them, at the professional choreography of doctor and patient, at moving information between one another with efficiency and care. He walked her to the clinic door, held it for her. She stepped through and turned. She had a question, a final question, something she'd forgotten. He was standing in the doorway of his clinic with the afternoon light behind her turning his fair complexion luminous, his pale eyes steady on her face, his hand holding the door in the specific way of someone who is in absolutely no hurry for this conversation to end. She asked her question. He answered. She said thank you. She left. He stood in the glass doorway and watched her walk away down the street, her long curly ponytail, her camel coat, her straight back. He turned back inside. That evening, she came home and told Ji-hoon she needed to speak with him tomorrow. She said it standing in the kitchen, just the two of them, the city visible through the windows. He looked up from his phone. One look at her face, controlled, deliberate, carrying weight, and he knew this was not a small conversation she was announcing. He said, "Okay." She nodded. She went to the bathroom. In the low bathroom light, the clinic document lay unfolded on the counter where she had been rereading it. Two words sat in soft focus in the middle of the page, unavoidable and precise. High risk. She folded the document. She turned off the light. Tomorrow. She waited until the coffee was made. This was a decision, small and practical, a kindness, perhaps. Give him the coffee. Give him the morning. Give him whatever small softness there is to give before the air changes. She brought the clinic envelope downstairs, set it on the coffee table, and she sat beside him, not across, beside, for the first time in days. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. She had made this choice deliberately too. Whatever she was about to tell him, she would tell him from beside him. Not from across a table. Not from the other side of a room. Beside him. Because they were still, whatever happened next, the two people who had chosen each other, who had built this life, who were about to discover that life had been building something back. He looked at her. Then, at the envelope. She picked it up. Slid the document out. Set it on the table, facing him. She did not speak. She let him read. She watched his eyes. She had watched those eyes for 3 years. She knew their language, the slight narrowing that meant he was filing information away, the particular still quality that meant something had landed hard, the micro-tremor of the jaw when he was controlling a reaction he didn't intend to have. He read the word pregnant and went very still. Not surprised, maybe. She had noticed his eyes on her hand when it had pressed to her stomach, across several rooms over several days, and Ji-hoon was not a man who missed things. But there is a difference between suspecting something and having the clinical, documented, unambiguous fact of it placed in front of you by the woman you asked for a divorce. He kept reading. She saw the second wave arrive, the phrase that came after pregnant, the phrase the document used to qualify and complicate and expand the first fact. High risk. His eyes stopped. The quality of his stillness changed. This was not the stillness of controlled reaction. This was the stillness of someone who has encountered something that briefly surpasses their system's capacity for control. He looked up. His dark eyes found her face. And she gave him her face, fully, completely, without the protective composure she had worn in every room for the past 4 days. This was not the place for composure. This was the place for truth. And truth means showing up without armor. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. She waited. She was very good at waiting. It was part of who she was, the capacity to hold space without filling it. He said something. One word, a question, maybe her name, maybe how long, and she answered him. Quietly and directly, as she always spoke when she was speaking from the truest part of herself. His hand moved across the coffee table without him seeming to decide to move it. He touched the edge of the document. Just the edge. As if making it real through contact. as if his hands needed to be part of understanding this in a way his eyes and his brain could not accomplish alone. He stood. He walked to the window. The same window. She watched him walk to the same place he had stood on the night he had asked for a divorce, and she understood that he had chosen this spot not consciously, but because the body goes to the places where it has already reckoned with large things. The window was his reckoning place. And he was reckoning now. She stood. She followed him. She stopped a few feet behind him, not crowding him, giving him the room. Her reflection joined his in the glass. Two people. The city beyond. The whole story contained in a window. He turned. He faced her. And she saw something in his face that she had not seen before, something that was not the controlled, composed, precise man she had married, but the person beneath that man, the person he was before he had learned that being composed was safer than being open. That person was very close to the surface right now. His face was not fully steady. He said her name. Just her name. Amara. The way he said it, it contained everything. The apology he hadn't made, and the tenderness he'd misplaced, and the fear that was arriving now, and the fact that whatever he had decided about his future, he had not factored in that her future was already, biologically, inevitably, bound up with this. She took one step toward him. He took one step toward her. They were close. The closest in days. His hand rose slowly, the gesture of a careful man being careful even in a moment of unwilled openness, and he cupped her face in his palm. She closed her eyes. He kept his open. He looked at her face the way you look at something you've been looking at for so long you stop seeing it, and then in a single moment see again with the full, stunned attention of the first time. She opened her eyes. She looked at him. There was love in her face. She knew he could see it. She wasn't trying to hide it. She had never been the one who hid the love. There was also something that asked the question without words. Does this change it? Does any of this change what you said at that table? His hand was still on her face. His dark eyes looked into hers. He didn't have the answer yet. She could see that too. But he had not moved away. The divorce papers had not been mentioned. Not tonight. He asked to come with her. She had not expected that. She had made the follow-up appointment assuming she would go alone, as she had gone the first 2 times, as she had navigated. In the particular solo flight mode, she defaulted to when things were difficult, and she didn't yet know how much to let someone into the difficulty. She had told him about the appointment, told him the time, given him the information without the invitation. He said, "Can I come?" She looked at him for a moment. She said yes. The clinic was the same, pale stone, white flowers, that particular quality of light that felt designed to calm things that could not easily be calmed. But it was different with Ji-hoon beside her. She was aware of the difference continuously, in the way you are aware of a new variable in an equation you had been working without it. He sat beside her in the waiting room. He didn't speak much. He was in one of his quiet modes, the focused, internally processing kind, not the cold kind. She had learned the difference. She watched him take in the clinic, the paintings on the wall, the medical brochures, the particular silence of a place full of complicated things being navigated quietly. Dr. Laurent came to the door. He saw them, saw her first, in the way he always seemed to be tracking for her specifically without appearing to do so, and then saw the man beside her, and his expression adjusted, precisely and professionally, to the reconfiguration of this appointment. He was extraordinary at this, at reading a room, at recalibrating without visible effort. He introduced himself to Ji-hoon with the ease of someone who made no assumptions and carried no awkwardness into other people's complicated lives. His handshake was firm and direct. Ji-hoon's handshake was the same. 2 men. One brief, mutually assessing handshake. And then they were inside the consultation room, and there was medicine to discuss, and that was the frame that held everything. Dr. Laurent walked them through the full picture. He was thorough and patient and did not simplify. He gave them the information the way you give intelligent people information, which means completely, with confidence that they can bear knowing the truth. The condition that made this pregnancy high risk. The specific parameters. The monitoring protocol. What they were watching for. What they were hoping to prevent. What the statistics said, and what statistics did not say, and what this particular patient's specific situation meant in terms of those statistics. Ji-hoon listened the way he listened to high-stakes meetings, completely without showing everything he was feeling, eyes tracking the doctor's face with the focused precision of a man who is taking in every piece of data and filing it in the specific architecture of his mind where important things go. But she could see from her slight angle from the specific literacy she had developed for this face. She could see the cost. She could see what each new piece of information cost him. The high-risk designation. The required monitoring. The thing Dr. Laurent said at a certain point that made Ji-hoon's jaw tighten the way a man's jaw tightens when he is absorbing something that is rearranging his internal landscape. He asked questions. Specific, intelligent, direct questions, the kind that showed he had already processed the first layer of information and was operating at the second layer. Dr. Laurent answered each one completely, without impatience, without condescension. She watched them. These two men, one Korean, one French, both extraordinary in their specific natures, engaged in the grave and practical language of her health and the life she was carrying. At one point, Dr. Laurent brought them to the medical imaging board, and the two men stood side by side, her husband and her doctor, looking at images that were the interior geography of her body, of the life growing inside her, and something about the image was so strange and human, and outside the normal categorization of her life that she felt it lodged somewhere in her chest where important things lodged. Ji-hoon turned to look at her from the light board. The full turn, the full face. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you have just received information that has disassembled and reassembled your understanding of what matters. He came back to the desk. He sat down beside her. And without planning to, or perhaps with exactly the right amount of planning, he reached over and took her hand. His hand around hers. On the desk. In front of Dr. Laurent. The wedding band on his finger caught the light. Dr. Laurent looked back at the file. Gave them the privacy of his averted eyes. He was very good at this, at being present without intruding, at knowing when to be the doctor, and when to be the human, and when to become briefly invisible so that two other people could be fully visible to each other. The appointment ended. Dr. Laurent walked them to the clinic entrance. He held the door. He shook Ji-hoon's hand, firm and genuine, and it held for a moment longer than the standard beat of professional courtesy. Two men in brief, wordless acknowledgement of something larger than the appointment. Something about the weight of what had been shared in that room, about the gravity of what lay ahead for this woman they were both, in their entirely different ways, committed to helping. She and the doctor had a final word as Ji-hoon stepped into the hall. He looked at her, and his pale blue eyes were warm with the specific warmth of a doctor who has done his work well and knows it and is also, in some private, entirely appropriate register, glad to have been the person who did this work. He said something quiet. She nodded. She walked through the door. On the street outside the clinic, she and Ji-hoon walked side by side. Not quite touching, but close, their shoulders nearly brushing, the particular proximity of two people who have been through something together and are still recalibrating the distance between them. They were talking. Quietly, but talking. In the clinic window behind them, barely visible through the glass, Dr. Laurent. Standing. Watching them walk away down the street. His face composed. His pale eyes following them until the crowd absorbed them and they were gone. He turned. He had patience. He was a doctor. He turned back into the clinic and got back to work. Weeks pass differently when you are growing something. The apartment was the same apartment, same marble, same city view, same candles she bought at the market on Saturdays, but different in the way that places become different when the people inside them have been through something together. There was a baby book on the coffee table now. Prenatal vitamins on the kitchen counter. Small, undramatic, irrevocable evidence that a decision had been made. Not just about the baby, about them. The divorce papers had never been filed. They had both noticed this. They had not spoken about it directly, not with the clinical language of reversals and decisions reconsidered. Some things, when they shift through action rather than statement. Ji-hoon had not filed. He had, instead, done what people who are reconsidering large decisions sometimes do. He had become present. More present than she could remember him being in the last year of their marriage. Small things he noticed when she was tired, actually noticed, not in the performative way of someone trying to demonstrate that they were noticing, but in the quiet, practical way of someone who was paying attention. He came home earlier. He set the table without being asked. He woke once at 3 in the morning and found her in the kitchen, unable to sleep, and made her tea without speaking, which was exactly the right thing to do. She found him one evening sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the ultrasound image from the last appointment. Just holding it, looking at it. She stood in the doorway and watched him without him knowing she was there. This man, this extraordinarily handsome, controlled, often impenetrable man, sitting on the edge of their bed, holding a small black and white image in both hands, looking at it with the expression of someone encountering something that had completely disassembled the usual operating parameters of his face. He became aware of her. He looked up, and he held the image up, a small gesture, almost shy, entirely unlike him, and precisely because it was unlike him, one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen him do. She smiled. Not the composed, controlled expression she had maintained through the hardest days of his story. A real smile, unguarded and luminous and entirely, irreversibly her. The most beautiful woman in the room, in the building, on the block, smiling at her husband holding an ultrasound image in both hands like it was something sacred, which it was. The final clinic appointment came on a clear morning. She went in alone, her choice, her space. Ji-hoon sat in the waiting room and let her have this. He had learned, these last weeks, when to come with her and when to wait. She sat across from Dr. Loran in the clean morning light, and they spoke as they had learned to speak, with the particular warm efficiency of two people who had navigated something serious together and come through it to the other side, where the view was clearer. The news was good, better than the cautious middle range she had been prepared for. The monitoring was working. The condition was stable. There was still a road ahead. There would always be a road. Some conditions don't resolve so much as get managed, and she understood this, but the worst of the immediate concern had receded. She breathed out. The breath she had been holding since that first afternoon in this office, since the phrase high risk had detonated quietly inside her. He watched her breathe out. His pale blue eyes rested on her face with the satisfaction of a man who chose this work because of exactly these moments. The breath out, the visible settling, the shift in a patient's face when fear recedes enough to let something else come through. He was good at this. He had chosen well in becoming who he was. They shook hands. She thanked him. The words "thank you" on her face meant everything that couldn't be filed under medicine. The being seen, the being accompanied in crisis, the particular grace of a person who does their job with their whole self and never steps over the line of what that job is. He nodded. His pale eyes said, it was enough. This was enough. She walked out into the waiting room. Ji-hoon stood the moment the door opened. His eyes went immediately to her face, reading it with the swift literacy he had developed for her in these last weeks, the literacy of someone paying attention. She gave him a small nod. Good. His shoulders dropped 1 centimeter. She walked to him. They left together. The afternoon was gold. The particular gold of late spring in the city, where the light seems to come not just from above but from the surfaces of things, from the windows and the pavements and the leaves of the trees that line the street outside the clinic. She had not noticed, until now, how beautiful the city was on an ordinary afternoon. He took her hand. She let him. They walked forward. Not toward anything specific. Home was in that direction, and dinner, and the ordinary life that was waiting for them with all its complications and its beauty, but the walking itself was the thing. Forward. Together. Her long curly ponytail lifting in the breeze. His dark hair catching the gold light. The joined hands in the frame, his wedding band, her fingers wrapped in his, the most quietly significant image in a story full of significant images. The divorce papers were never filed. This fact was never stated aloud between them. It didn't need to be. It was simply true, and they both knew it, and sometimes the most important things in a life are the things that didn't happen. The door that wasn't opened, the signature that wasn't given, the word that was almost said and then wasn't because something arrived in the space before it. Something arrived. In his office. Quiet now, the clinic emptied, the afternoon done. Dr. Loran stood at his window. He looked at the street below. The same street she had walked down. The same street they had walked down together. He was a doctor. He had a next patient. He had a life that was full of people who needed him to be exactly what he was, Nothing more and nothing less, and he was grateful for that fullness and that clarity. He turned from the window. He got back to work. And in the apartment, in the golden evening light of a city that had never paused for any of this and never would, she sat in the armchair. The same armchair from the first night.
But Ji-hoon was there now.
Sitting on the armrest beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his chin resting lightly on the top of her head. Her long ponytail draped across his arm like it had always belonged there. Her hand rested on her stomach, more visibly now, the small evidence of new life pressing gently outward. They faced forward. Both present. Both still here. The city burned beautiful and indifferent beyond the windows, the way it always did, the way it always would. But inside this room, on this evening, in this light, they were not indifferent to each other. They were very, very far from indifferent.